Amen. Good morning, church. It's good to see you this morning. Also, last week, I think you heard that the pastors and the overseers, we went away on a retreat for the weekend, and you're going to hear more about that in the next coming weeks, but it was just an incredible time for us together, and really seeing a lot of prayers for what we were hoping that weekend was going to be answered. And so as we're going to have an email coming out soon. We'll kind of update you on things that we feel like God's been speaking to us about in that process. But thank you so much, because I know a lot of you were praying for us for that time. And so we just want to say thank you for that, and keep praying as we just are seeking for God to really lead us as a church right now, wherever he's going. We just want to go with him, right? That's what we want to be as a church. So as we get going this morning, I was thinking about something this week, and I don't know if you can relate to this or not, but it's this problem that my wife and I have. And we have this problem every time we get one of those rare moments without a child, and we are trying to decide what to do. And so we have these moments. Maybe it's a surprise moment where all of a sudden he's like asleep and you didn't expect that, or like grandma comes in and takes him for a night or something. And so we end up having this conversation, and it goes like this. So what do you want to do? Well, I don't know. What do you want to do? Well, I don't know. I asked you first. Yeah, but I decided last time. Well, yeah, but that's because I wanted you to decide last time. It's like, okay, well then you decide this time too. Well, no, I don't want to decide this time. Will you please just tell me what you want to do? Can you guys relate? Anybody relate? Yeah, and so what happens is 3 hours later, it's time for bed. We haven't done anything, right? And so we have this issue, and it's actually rooted in something that's really good. It's rooted in a sincere desire that we have to find out what the other wants, right? We're trying to figure out what the other person's looking for, what they want, what would bless them, what would please them. And as I was thinking about that problem, I started to think about also our relationship with God. And it just made me ask this question: do I come to God that same way in my relationship with him? Or even when I have like specific time set apart for him, right? Time that I may have set aside for prayer, or time that I have set aside specifically just to get in the word with him. Or maybe like on a Sunday morning like this, where we all come together and we say, hey, we're coming together to meet with God. We're coming together to worship him. And so I think the question is, are we coming in the middle of that coming? As we're preparing, as we get here, as we're going through it, are we coming at the same way my wife and I do when we're trying to figure out what to do ourselves? Is really just seeking God to say, God, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you would like from me? Both in these moments, but maybe just more in my life. What is it that you want to show me? And when I think about this question, I think it's a great question for us to ask, because it also comes back to understanding the promises of God. And in John chapter 10, Jesus is talking to us, and he gives us this promise, and he says, hey, I have come that you may have life, and that you may have it to the fullest. And when I think about what Jesus said, that I have come that you may have life and have it to the fullest, I'm challenged, because the truth is that when I come to God and I'm saying, hey, God, what is it that you're seeking from me? In the middle of that, sometimes it's hard to do, I can find myself trusting and resting in the fact that what his intentions are for me are good. So when he says, hey, David, here's what I'm looking for you, maybe in this moment, or he's starting to challenge me a little bit and say, David, here's what I'm looking from you in the life that you live for me. As I come to him with that attitude, I can also come back to this promise from John 10 and realize that he's got a promise for me, that he has come that I may experience life to its fullest. And so as he is seeking from me, in the middle of that, there is a blessing from me that comes in him being a part of fulfilling that promise in my life. And I think what we find is that we find ourselves maybe sometimes just getting really comfortable in life, right? We get comfortable in what we know. We get comfortable in Christianity as we live it. We get comfortable in the patterns we have in life. And we maybe stop asking that question at some point. I think we all asked it at different points in our Christian life. Maybe at some point we found ourselves not asking it as often. Maybe we feel like we know the answers and we're comfortable with how we live those out. But I think what comes with that question is this continual thing to realize is that God is calling us not to settle. And I think there's different reasons that we settle. And I think all of us wrestle with this in some way. Sometimes we might settle because there's this maybe fear of the unknown. Like, this is working. So if I go to God again and say, all right, what do you want to do different now? Or what is it that you're looking from me next? I don't know what he's going to say, right? And so sometimes there's just this fear of, hey, I don't know what God's going to say or what God's going to do. In the middle of that also can just be, we just wrestle with trust sometimes. Like, this could be scary. What if I don't like it? What if it's not what I'm looking for? Or maybe just sometimes, if we're honest, we struggle with coming to God and asking him because we wonder whether we're good enough. Like, we just wonder whether I can really do what he might ask. And because of that, we end up just pushing pause, or we settle, or we find ourselves comfortable with where we're at. And instead, I think what God is there, he's saying, but David, don't you realize that I made you for more? Don't you realize that you were made for more? And that if you would come and ask me in this, and look at my promises of this life that I've said I have come to give you, there is so much more for you if you would just believe me. And so I think a big question this morning we might want to ask is, do we believe him when he says that I have come to give you life and give it to the fullest? This morning we're going to look at a story that we find in the book of John. John is the fourth book in what we call the first four books of the New Testament that we call the Gospels. And what's unique about these four books is that they tell us the story of Jesus. They tell us the story of his life. They tell us what his teachings were, and they each kind of tell it to us from a little different perspective. Some of the stories are found in different ones at the same time, but then some just have a story by themselves. And one thing about the book of John I love so much, and if I will admit, it's probably my favorite of those first four books we call the Gospels. I love it because of this unique view that John seems to have as he's writing. As you can just read him, you almost begin to see just how much he loved Jesus. You just see the close friendship that he had with Jesus. And he talks about in this book the relationship that he had with him as they walked and did life together. And then as he's writing, you see that he just wants us so desperately to see what he sees, to see the heart that Jesus had for us, for those that he was there, that he has for us now, to see the incredible things he did, the things that he taught, so that we would know the heart of God even more. And so I think he's writing for us to be able to see that. And that's where I want us to go this morning. So we're going to be in the book of John in the 4th chapter. And we're going to read a story that we only find in this book right here. So if you want to follow along, you can turn your Bibles. I'm not having them hand out the Bibles this week because I'm going to have it on the screen. But if you want to open your own Bible, you can do that. But we're going to kind of be reading it together on the screen this morning. So John chapter 4 is where we're going to be. John chapter 4. And as you're turning there, I just want to kind of set up the story for us a little. Jesus was traveling. And in this traveling, he made a choice that most Jews, maybe even all Jews, never would have made. Because Jesus, as a Jew, the people that were the Jews, they would never travel to this place called Samaria. Because the Samaritan people were people that the Jews had no love for. Because what had happened 100 years before this story took place, the Samaritan people have made a choice. They decided to compromise on what God had asked them to do. They weren't willing to do their life the way God had asked them to live it. They weren't willing to fully obey what God had asked his people to do. And so what happens is this rift occurs. And through time, they continue to live in this compromise. They continue to kind of more approach life the way they wanted to it, trying to find their best way that they were comfortable with to get to God and still kind of live the life they wanted to live. And this huge rift grew more and more between the Jews and the Samaritans. And it got so bad that at this point in the story that we're going to come here, the Jews would do whatever they can to avoid this land. They had roads that they made so they could like travel, and it cost them a lot of time, but they travel around Samaria. They did not want to go in this land because they did not want to talk with these people. They wanted to have nothing to do with them. But Jesus, he was not the typical Jew. Jesus is not the typical person. Jesus is about doing the will of God. And so what he does is Jesus doesn't avoid those who need him. Even if they don't want him, Jesus is a pursuer. He's a pursuer of those that need him the most, even if they're not looking for him. So as Jesus comes to Samaria, he sits down by himself at this well that was used to draw water by the local people. And as he was sitting there, the Samaritan woman comes up to him. And that's where we want to pick up on the story. So we're going to start in John chapter 4, starting with verse 7. And we're just going to kind of read this together and see what was going on, to see what John wanted us to see about the heart of God through this story. Verse 7 starts out, "Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, 'Please give me a drink.'" Now, if you want to stop right there, I think there's something significant already in this first verse. It tells us so much about who Jesus is. He not only reaches out to this woman that no one else would have reached out to. He initiates conversation with this person that nobody would have done. And in his heart, in the middle of that, he does it in a way that I think we wouldn't expect. Normally, when I think about reaching out to someone, I think about what I can kind of offer them, right? It's like, what can I give you so you know that I love you? But instead, he has a different perspective. He starts out with saying, "Can you do something for me?" And I think that's something to note as we continue this story and we see what Jesus was up to in this conversation. And so it continues in verse 8. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" As the woman responds, we have to realize she's trying to figure out what's going on. Like, she is very, very skeptical right now. She knows how the Jews see her, right? She understands this relationship between her and the Jews. So she's cautious what's happening, and she's skeptical. Maybe she's even a little bit, as I mentioned before, she's wrestling with a little bit of shame because she knows that they don't think she's good enough, that they don't think she's even worthy to have a conversation with. But even though it was probably this cold, a little pushback reaction from her, Jesus just keeps going. Look at verse 10. Jesus replied, he said, if you only knew the gift God has for you and who you are speaking to, you would ask me and I would give you living water. But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket, she said, and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And besides, do you think that you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed? And even right now, this potential first resistance, I think there's something we see about Jesus. Is Jesus, he gets right to the point. And even though she was pushing back on him, he's like, well, actually, let me tell you something. I actually have an offer for you. If you only knew who I was right now, you'd realize that I have something to give you, something that is much better than what you actually are coming here to get. And he's like, so are you interested? Are you interested in what I have? And then, of course, though, she's still really skeptical. She's like, how can you have something better? Like, this is all I have known, but not only that, this has been good enough for a long, long time. Hey, before you ever came, we've been doing just fine with the water that's right here. This is how we have always done it. And I want us to think about that phrase for a moment. This is how we have always done it. I think that phrase is one of the most dangerous phrases that we can ever say when God comes to us and says, but I'm offering you something. When God's like, I have something new for you. I have something I want to give you. I have a place that I'm inviting you to. And when our response is, yeah, but don't you see what we have here? This is good. It's been working for us. This is how we have always done it. And what we do is we find ourselves resting in what we are comfortable with. And even when Jesus comes, we struggle saying, okay, what is it that you have? So even now, she's still really resistant. And she's like, what do you mean? You have something better for me. And then in verse 13, Jesus replied, anyone who drinks this water will soon be thirsty again. But those who drink the water I give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. And even she says, what do you mean you have something better? Jesus is like, yeah, I've got something better. Because you don't know what you're missing. This is all you've known, and you think this is good enough. But if you just saw what I had for you, if you just saw that I have a way to meet your needs, not just for right now, but for all eternity, this is way bigger than you realize. If you can trust me for a moment, get past what you've known and see what I have something that gives you life like you've never experienced it before. And now it's got her attention. And she's ready to see what Jesus has. So in verse 15, she replies, "Please, sir," the woman said, "give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water." And so now it seems like she's ready for what Jesus has for her, right? So what do you think that Jesus would do? He's come and he's made this offer to this woman. He's like, "Hey, you think this is best, but I've actually got something for you. And if you only knew who I was, man, you would ask me for this living water and I would give it to you and you could experience this whole new life." So now she's coming to him and she's like, "Okay, what is this that you have? I'll take it." And so what does Jesus respond? What is the response we would expect him to have? Because I think what we look for Jesus to say next is, all right, okay, great, you're on board with this. Now just believe in me and just follow me, and then we're good to go. But that's not Jesus' response right here. Because Jesus knows as he comes and he offers us what he is offering us, in his promises that says, "I have come that you may have life and have it to the fullest," he also knows that in that it also requires something from us. And so the conversation can't just end right there. Now it's time to get honest and real with her. And so he says to her in verse 16, look at this. "Go and get your husband," Jesus told her. "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you are living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." And I think this is the part that most of us, we might pause and we might struggle with what Jesus begins to do here. Why would Jesus make an offer to her and then start to bring up all this other stuff, right? I think sometimes we might have things going in our head was like, doesn't he know he's going to like push her away? Doesn't he know that she's not going to feel very loved right now? This doesn't make sense. Jesus, why would you make her that offer and then bring up all this junk that's just going to kind of distract from the issue when she says yes? And again, I think Jesus knows this truth, that we can't experience the life to the fullest, the life that he is inviting us to, the life that he wants us to have with him, that we can't experience that and still hold on to the things that are contrary to that life. We can't both experience the life he has and hold on to the things that we still want when they go against the very life that he made us for. If he made us for something more, then at some point to begin to experience that, he knows we've got to let go of this extra stuff that we want to hold on to, that robs us and takes us away, farther away from the life that he says he has come to give us. And you know what though, even though Jesus, he knew her secrets, he knew what she had done. He knew her sins. He knew the life that she lived, which had been completely against what the life she knew God had for her. That never stops Jesus. It did not stop him from reaching out to her. It didn't stop him from saying, "But I have something for you." Even though it's what you have now is so far from that, even though it doesn't seem like you may want it, I'm still going to reach out for you. In the middle of reaching out for us, he says, though, I got to be honest with you. I need to be real with you. We got to talk about this other stuff that's robbing you from this new life. And I think this is really why she may have been really skeptical about Jesus. Some religious Jewish person coming in, she knows how the Jews view her. She knows that she's not worthy of what they say they have. She knows that they look at her with so much disgust that they don't even want to talk to her. Can you imagine the shame that she must feel from those religious people around her that she has encountered that say they know God and yet won't even talk to her? So of course she's skeptical. Of course she doesn't know if she trusts what's happening right now. She knew things weren't right, but the thing is, this woman, and I want us to be honest about this even as God comes to us this morning, this woman could be any one of us at any point in our lives. I want you to think about that. She could be any one of us. Maybe it's not a broken marriage. Maybe it's not sexual sin. Or maybe it is. Maybe there's that thing in your life or those few things that you've worked really hard to try to just keep a secret. You've worked really hard to try to hide it and push it away so that nobody knows that thing is there. Hey, you don't want it there, but you don't know what to do with it, and it's still there, and you got that shame and you got that guilt, and so you just push it away. The truth is, as hard as we try to hide it from people, as hard as we try to hide it from God, the truth is we can never hide anything from God. But the good news is, hey, we don't have to hide anything from God. We don't have to hide anything because just like with this woman, Jesus did not pursue her because she had it all together. Jesus didn't run after her because, boy, she had just been doing all the right things long enough. It's like, hey, now I think we can do something with this. He didn't pursue her because she was starting to figure everything out or starting to live the way she was supposed to live. In fact, he came to her because she didn't. He was reaching out to her because she didn't know how to live. He was reaching out to her because she didn't know what was right. In the middle of the story, church, we're not that much different. I know in my own life and where I've been at different places in my life that all of us are broken. Because apart from Jesus, we live in that brokenness. And all of us might be struggling with something. Maybe we're even pretending a little because we're not sure if we can bring all of that to God, and we're definitely not sure if we can bring all of that to each other. But in our brokenness, God does not stop. Instead, he runs after us in our brokenness. He runs after us in our sin. He runs after us in our shame and in the pain and all the stuff that we are wrestling with. And yet when he runs after us, yes, he's going to be honest and he's going to be real. He's going to have that tough conversation with us, but it is such a loving conversation. He does in such a loving way. He's often more honest than we want to be, but church, this is what Jesus does. He does what he does with pure, loving purpose for us. I think bigger than we can even understand, so it's hard for us to even grasp how God could love us so much. And so when he makes us see our brokenness, think about this for a moment. When God makes us see our brokenness, even more, it's because he wants us to see his greatness. Again, hear that. When he makes us see our brokenness that we're so hard wanting to avoid, it's because he also wants us to see his greatness, the greatness of his love despite what we have done, the greatness of his mercy despite where we currently are at, the greatness of his grace that he is waiting to pour out for us if we would just come to him. That's why God doesn't want us to hide in that, because in hiding that, we miss who God is. We miss his beauty. We miss his greatness. We miss what he offers us that brings us to that life to the fullest. And so he reaches out to you and I where we are really at, not where we pretend to be, not where we want to be. Jesus said it like this in another gospel, in the Gospel of Mark. Listen to what Jesus said. I think this shows his heart so much. He said, healthy people, they don't need a doctor. Sick people do. And I have come not to call those who think they are righteous, but to those who know they are sinners. Listen to what Jesus said. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Do you ever know that person that no matter how sick they are, they won't admit it? Have you met that person, right? They're just sitting there coughing up a lung. They're dying. They're on the floor. They're like spinning in circles. And they're like, I'm fine. Let's go run a marathon. And you're just like, oh my goodness, don't you see how sick you are? What are you doing? How do you not see this? You've got to go to a doctor. You've got to get better. Why do you keep pretending you're sick? You're going to die. In the middle of that, I think we see something, even in our own lives, that we tend to also find ourselves in that same situation. Why do we pretend like we're not sick with Jesus? Why do we pretend like that everything's fine, that we don't have sin that we're wrestling with in our lives, when Jesus said, I've not come to those that think they're righteous. I've come to those that know they're sinners. Because that's the kind of God I am. That's the kind of love I have to offer you. Church, we can admit we're sick. It's okay, because we all are. And just pretending that we're not struggling as we go through our life with Christ, wrestling with the sin that so easily entangles us. Oh, we're just like that sick person sitting on the ground, just coughing up a lung, trying to tell everybody that he's fine. The rest of us are like, oh my goodness, go see a doctor. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying to us. And he reaches out to us with that loving sincerity that we can't find anywhere else. And yet, I think even after we begin to see that, because if you have decided to follow Jesus, at some point you did experience that, right? At some point you realized, man, my sin has separated me from God. And so, man, I got to come to God because I can't do this on my own. And so we even realized that has separated us. And yet in the middle of that, as we continue on our Christian life, for some reason, we still want to avoid these conversations with God. But then also what happens is we begin to change the subject with God sometimes. We begin to tell him, or we tell ourselves, well, things are fine. And as we change the subject, we actually sometimes try to put on this fake spirituality. Or we try to just start talking about spiritual things, maybe not even just to God, maybe to other people, just to make it look like everything is good. We know what's going on. We're these spiritual people. And that's what this woman tried to do. Look at verse 19. She said, "Sir," the woman said, "you must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place to worship, while we Samaritans claim it's here at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped?" What does this have to do with anything they're talking about, guys? It has nothing to do with what they're talking about. She's like, oh, this guy knows. This is awkward. So she's going to change that subject right now. Oh, I see that you're this really spiritual guy, so let me have some real spiritual talk with you. And let's talk about worship, and let's talk about tradition, and let's talk about all these religious things that we have, that we make and we put up and we create in our own lives that stop us from having to get real with each other and get real with God. Let's get back to these petty arguments of things that don't even matter. That's what she's doing. Instead of getting real enough to say, here's what's really going on inside of me, and here's where I still need God, and here's what I still need God to do. And so in the middle of this, as she goes back to this kind of man-made religious argument, that really the big picture of it is just silly. She actually brings it back to worship, which might sound and look really spiritual, but she's completely missing what Jesus is doing. And so Jesus is like, all right, you want to talk about worship? Let's bring it back to what I'm really, really looking for. Start with verse 21 with me. Jesus replied, "Believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him. For salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him in that way. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." And so now Jesus just gets to the real thing. He's like, this is what I'm seeking. You want to bring this up? Fine. I'm not seeking water. That's not what I'm looking for. And I'm not looking for you to perform for me. I'm not looking to see how religious you can look. And I'm not looking to see how you think you can dress good enough to look good for me. If you can say all the right things to sound spiritual enough for me. He's like, that is not at all what I am looking for. He says, I am looking for your heart. So let's be honest about what's going on in there. And church, how much we do not want it to start there. That is the one place we don't like it to start. We prefer to be able to say, if you would just tell me these 3 things I need to do, then I'll know I'm a good Christian. Then I know I'm a good worshiper. If you just give me these lists of these things that I'm supposed to accomplish. Or maybe what I'm supposed to do that makes me look right to you and to others. But when Jesus reaches out, he's going to always be honest with us, with what he wants from us. And he's going to tell us, it does not start with your behavior. He's going to always come back and remind us, it's got to start with your heart. It always has to start with our heart. And he says to us like he did to her, I know everything about you. So stop trying to hide. I know what's going on inside of you. I know more than you even realize I know. And I've got something for you, but it's not what you thought before. But if you'd be willing to trust me, we can break open this life that you've been living, and you can begin to experience life to the fullest like you have never seen before. And so he's seeking with us, in us, a willingness to say, Jesus, I'm willing to come on your terms. Hey, he is the God of the universe, church. He is the creator of it all. We're not going to fool him, and we don't get to change the rules with him. He's saying, this is how I need you to come. But there's a hope in this if you would just see it, if you would just trust me. And so we have to decide, do we have to figure out, are we willing to give that to him? And sometimes we look at a verse like this and we look at that statement where he says what he's looking for is someone that worships in spirit and truth. And we kind of make these really theologically deep. But I think it's really simple for us. Because here's what Jesus is saying to us. He's saying, when I'm looking for someone that's going to come to me and worship me in spirit, to come and live their life for me by the Spirit, what they're saying is, he's saying, I want all of you. I want all of you. Because there's this thing that we miss sometimes. We sometimes think that we are a physical body that happens to have a spirit. But you know what we really are? We are a spiritual being that actually happens to have a body right now. Because one day the body is going to decay and go away. But the spiritual being, the core of who we are, all of who we are, that is what he is seeking from us. So circumstances change, but our spirit doesn't. In line with who God is, he is looking at us to fully worship and engage with him with our entire being. And Jesus is honest enough to say what he wants. He was asked one time, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus said in Matthew chapter 22, he said, you must love the Lord with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind. You hear that? All of your heart, your emotions, what seems to drive you, what you feel, all of your mind, what you think and what you believe, your soul, the very thing I have come to save and restore to me. But again, we want to make it about other things and doing enough good things. And that's not what God is looking for from us. He's looking for our entire spirit. Because then on the other side of us bringing all that we are, on the other side of that is all who Jesus is. Because he is the truth. So he's saying, as you bring all that you are to me, will you believe everything that I say I am? Will you trust everything I'm asking of you? Will you be willing to bring to me all that you are? Because he's saying, do you trust me with your life? I made you. I formed you. So what I'm looking is for those that are coming to me in spirit and in truth. All of who they are, trusting and believing and living in light of all who Jesus tells us that he is. And then he says that living water that he offers us, it changes us. Not because of the behavior that we somehow try to fix ourselves, because of the work of Jesus by the power of the Holy Spirit in us. And it's not always what we want to hear, but that's what a loving father does. A loving father, he comes and he tells us what we don't want to hear sometimes. My son is on this kick right now. Like, he needs 12 hours of sleep. And if he does not get 12 hours of sleep, if he's not cranky, I'm cranky. One of us is going to be cranky. But he has this thing right now where he's like, I need all the lights on in my room to go to sleep because it's scary. And I bought into that for like 2 weeks. And now I'm realizing he just doesn't want to go to sleep. So what do I have to do? Well, last night he said it again. He's like, Dad, can I have the lights on? No, you can't have the lights on. But Dad, I'm scared. No, you're really not. But Dad, I'll never be able to go to sleep. Actually, you won't go to sleep with all the lights on. That's why you've only been getting like 8 hours of sleep, because I come in 2 hours later and you're still awake. No, Dad, I need these lights. No, son, I know what you need. You can't have those lights on. And it's not what he wants to hear. But a loving dad doesn't just say, okay, fine, whatever you want. A loving dad says, no, son, it's actually not what you think. It's not what you thought, but that's okay. I'm still going to love you, but I'm turning off these lights, and it's time to go to sleep. And then what happens? 20 minutes later, I go in there, that kid snores louder than me. And he's asleep. And it took a loving heart of a father that comes to him and willing to say that. And then we begin to see that we were made for much more than we realize when we trust God, who knows much more than we do, to surrender our lives to him in this way. Because in the last interaction they have in verse 25, the woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. And then Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. He says, I am the one that you have been looking for. And this morning, I just want to be honest with us for a moment. Whether you are a follower of Christ, whether you've been following Christ for 1 year, whether you've been following Christ for 15 years, wherever you're at in that, or whether you're someone who's just kind of seeking, you're like, I'm trying to understand all of this, or maybe you're someone who's just saying, I need someone to convince me that this is even real. The thing is, we are all seeking, we are all longing for something. Jesus came and he was speaking to what he knew what she was longing for, this life that was bigger than what she had just been trying to maintain. This deep, soul satisfying relationship with God that begins with us saying, okay, Jesus, what is it that you're asking from me? And here's the thing, even as Jesus says that, he says, will you trust me? Because it can be better than you ever imagined. We have to remember that that still doesn't mean that life's always perfect. It's not, he doesn't say this because we're going to somehow get everything we've ever wanted. But he does say it because he says, in me, in this hope, as he would have said to the woman at the well, as he would say to us this morning, he would say, there's no more shame. There's no more fear. We no longer have to be like the Samaritans from the outside looking in and said, Jesus is inviting us to him. He's inviting us to walk with him, to experience this new life. It's much more than I think we realize, church. There's so much more that God has for us. But we have to be willing to say, all right, Lord, what is it that you are seeking? And that's when we begin to experience the relationship that he's really made us to have with him, and we begin to experience life to its fullest. So I think we just have to say, are we willing to give it? Are we willing to ask that question to God and then be willing to say, all right, Lord, this is going to get maybe a little awkward, but what is it that you're seeking from me that I haven't been giving? What is it that you're wanting? So that I can see what this life was that you really made me for with you. So I want to ask you this morning, just a couple of questions. Where do you find yourself in this story? Because I think somewhere, all of us find ourselves in this story. Because we haven't made it yet. Maybe you struggle with even the fact that Jesus reaches out to you. And so maybe this morning he's reaching out to you and he says, I have something for you. I've been wanting to get your attention. I've been wanting you to see how much I love you. I've been wanting you to realize that I have this life for you, this living water, so much better than what you've known. And so maybe this morning you just have to just come to Christ and say, all right, maybe now it's just time to say yes. Here I am. What are you seeking from me, Lord? And just say, yes, I guess I'm ready. Quit playing games with God and quit messing around with whether I think it's worth the sacrifice, but to say I'm willing to give myself to you. Say yes to him this morning, maybe for the first time. Or maybe you're someone and you've tried to perform for Jesus and you've tried to perform for others. You gave your life to Christ, and as you've been walking this life and you got kind of comfortable with things, you forgot about the relationship and it just became about doing those things, right? As long as I make it to church enough, I have enough Bible study, or I dress the right way, or I look the right way, or I say enough spiritual things, or I sing loud enough in church, whatever it might be. But maybe those things have been coming out of a shame or insecurity of really just giving yourself over to God completely, of having that tough conversation with him. Maybe you've been performing a little bit. And today God's like, let's just get real. Let's get back to where we started from, you and me, our relationship, what I might be looking to have with you apart from all these things you do to perform for me. Because maybe we honestly find ourselves wanting to run from that tough conversation. I have been there. I find myself still there. As God continually is working on my life and he points things out to me and shows me my own failures, my own struggles, my own sin, my own pride, I still want to avoid that conversation. God's like, but David, do you trust me enough to ask me what I'm wanting to do in your life? Enough to ask me what I'm seeking from you? What am I really looking for from you? To be that man that comes to me in full spirit and full truth, that just offers myself completely to him, and then letting God continue to work away at my life. He comes to me because I don't have it all together. But he reminds me that that's what he knows. And that never changed anything he was ever going to do for me. It never changed how much he loved me. And so he still comes to me in that same way. So wherever you are within those three things, maybe it's time to just say yes for the first time. Maybe it's time to tell God you've been doing more performing than you have been giving your heart. Or maybe it's time to just say, God, all right, what's that tough conversation we need to have this morning? To stop trying to hide. So I'll invite you, would you pray with me for a few moments? As the music's playing, I want to invite us to just come to God, quietly just to ourselves for a few minutes. My guess is, as I was sharing those three things, one of those things, you know it's you. At least one of them. And you just got to be able to be honest and real with God right now. I want to invite you first to just say, God, here's where I think I'm at. And then ask him, Lord, what is it that I need to do? And let the Holy Spirit just speak to your heart for a few moments. And then what he's asking, as Wade mentioned last week, let's put our hands up and surrender and say, yes, Lord. I say yes this morning. Take a few moments. I'll come up and close in just a few minutes. Lord, this morning I just want to say thank you that you said it's the kindness of God that brings us to a place of turning from what we have known, from sins or attitudes or desires that are against you, that it's your kindness that brings us to a place of turning away from them, repenting and walking away from those things. Lord, we just thank you for that kindness. And now we ask, Lord, whatever you're doing in our hearts, that you would help us to be faithful to respond in obedience, whether we need to tell somebody about it, to help us walk this path, or we need to pray with someone even now as we continue in our prayer time, whatever that is. We just want to stay with you right now in these moments and come to you truly as you say, and be worshipers that come in spirit and in truth, because that is the kind you are seeking. And we want to be that for you this morning, Lord. Thank you for that mercy, your kindness, and that you offer us. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to be back in the prayer corner. If you'd like to pray, God's working on your heart and you just want to pray through what God might be calling you to or anything like that, I'll be back there. But also, as Barbara's singing, if you want to just pray with someone next to you or grab someone, it's a little bit quieter back in that corner. You can just come back there with somebody else and pray with somebody else if you like. But let's just continue on in worship and prayer. And let's just see what God has for us as we respond to him now in spirit and in truth to be the worshipers that he seeks.